The air in The Gilded Spoon. A bastion of Manhattan's elite crackled with an electricity it hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the clinking of crystal or the murmur of high society. It was fear. A man had walked in a ghost from the city's tabloids, a billionaire known for his brutal business tactics and a personal life shrouded in tragedy and rumor. His name was Sterling Thorne. One by one, the seasoned waitersmen who had served presidents and royalty refused his table. They saw a monster. But one waitress, a young woman named Evelyn Reed, saw something else. She saw a challenge. The bronze-handled doors of the Gilded Spoon swung inward with a weight that seemed to silence the room. It wasn't the chime that hung above the entrance, a delicate silver bell meant to announce patrons with a cheerful tinkle, but the sudden, palpable drop in atmospheric pressure, the low hum of conversation, the confident clatter of silverware on porcelain, the almost imperceptible fizz of champagne being poured. It all seemed to contract, pulling inward, toward the figure who now stood framed in the grand entryway. He was not a physically imposing man, but he carried an aura of immense crushing gravity. This was Sterling Thorne. His name was a brand, a weapon, a whisper that could topple stock prices or launch $1,000-a-plate charity galas. He was dressed in a suit, so exquisitely tailored it seemed less like fabric and more like a second skin, a dark charcoal that absorbed the warm golden light of the chandeliers and gave nothing back. His hair was silver at the temples, a distinguished touch that contrasted sharply with the cold, predatory stillness of his face. His eyes, a pale, unforgiving blue, swept across the dining room, not with the leisurely appreciation of a guest, but with the critical, dismissive air of a conqueror surveying his latest acquisition. He didn't wait to be greeted. He moved past the flustered young hostess, whose practiced smile faltered as if she'd walked into a wall of ice. He strode directly to the most coveted table in the establishment, Table 7. It was nestled in a secluded alcove, offering panoramic views of the park through a floor-to-ceiling window, yet providing an intimate seclusion from the rest of the dining floor. It was the table reserved for proposals for quiet celebrations, for the silent, powerful handshakes that sealed multi-million-dollar deals. Tonight it was occupied by a young couple, their faces glowing with the unmistakable sheen of new love. Sterling Thorne stopped beside their table. He didn't speak to them. He didn't even acknowledge them. He simply looked at the restaurant's manager, a man named Mr. Davenport, who was now rushing towards him, his face a mask of anxious placation. "Mr. Thorne?" Davenport began, his voice a strained whisper. "What an unexpected pleasure. If you had called, we would have had your usual table prepared." Thorne's gaze remained fixed on Table 7. "That is my usual table," he said. His voice was quiet, yet it cut through the room like a shard of glass. "And it appears to be occupied. Rectify this." The young couple at the table froze their forks halfway to their mouths. The man, flustered, started to speak. "I'm sorry, we have a reservation." Sterling Thorne turned his head slowly, and his pale blue eyes fell upon the man for the first time. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The young man's words died in his throat. All the color drained from his face. It was as if he had been pinned to his seat by the sheer force of Thorne's will. Thorne held his gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment before turning back to Davenport. The message was clear. Davenport, sweating visibly now under the high ceilings, scurried over to the couple. There was a frantic, hushed exchange. Apologies were offered, promises of complimentary champagne, the best dessert in the house, a future reservation on the house. The couple, thoroughly intimidated and humiliated, gathered their things and were quickly escorted to a less prominent table near the kitchens. The entire dining room watched in a state of suspended animation, a silent, collective cringe. Once the table was cleared, Thorne seated himself. He didn't thank Davenport. He simply unbuttoned his suit jacket, placed a sleek black phone on the white linen, and stared out the window as if the entire humiliating episode had been nothing more than a minor administrative task beneath his notice. Davenport retreated to the relative safety of the waiter's station. Near the kitchen, his face pale. His best waiters were gathered there, a veteran crew who had seen everything. There was Samuel, a man in his late 50s with a stoic demeanor and joints that ached after a long shift, who was saving for his daughter's college tuition. There was Gregory Younger, sharper, with a quick wit and an even quicker hand for clearing plates, who prided himself on his impeccable service and the hefty tips that came with it. And there was Thomas the sommelier, whose knowledge of wine was legendary. "He's at 7, Davenport said, his voice barely audible. "Who's taking him?" A heavy silence fell over the group. It was Samuel who broke it, shaking his head slowly. "Not me, Robert. Not after last time. He accused me of trying to poison him because the water had a sliver of lemon in it. Said it was unsolicited citrus contamination." "I spent an hour apologizing," Gregory scoffed, though there was no humor in it. "Last time he was here, he made me stand at the table and describe in minute detail the entire life cycle of the lobster I was about to serve him. From egg to his plate. Then he sent it back because he found the story depressing. Thomas, usually the most unflappable of them all, simply polished a wine glass with a grim intensity. He once asked for a 1982 Waitress. When I presented it, he made me open it, decant it, and then pour the entire bottle down the sink because he said the bouquet was presumptuous. An $18,000 bottle of wine poured down the sink. My hands were shaking for a week. Davenport looked from one man to the next, his desperation growing. "Someone has to take the table. He's a member. He spends a fortune here." "And he costs a fortune," Samuel retorted quietly. Indignity. "I won't do it," Gregory stated flatly. "My mortgage payment is due, but it's not worth the abuse. Let him pour his own water." "I am suddenly very busy with inventory in the cellar," Thomas said, already backing away toward the wine cellar door. Davenport was beginning to panic. The entire system of the Gilded Spoon, a well-oiled machine of service and decorum, was grinding to a halt because of one man. The staff's refusal was a quiet, desperate mutiny. They were professional, but they were also human, and Sterling Thorne had a unique talent for stripping away their professionalism and leaving only the raw, exposed nerve of their humanity. He didn't just complain. He systematically dismantled a person's confidence piece by piece for his own inscrutable amusement. The minutes ticked by. Sterling Thorne sat alone at table 7, a solitary island of immense wealth and power, a black hole from which no light or waiter seemed able to escape. He hadn't looked at his phone. He hadn't gestured for service. He simply waited with the unnerving patience of a predator who knows its prey has nowhere to run. The entire restaurant was his hostage, held captive by the sheer, unadulterated force of his arrogance. And in the hushed, terrified space he had created, no one dared to move. It was in this suffocating silence that a new figure stepped forward from the shadows of the service corridor. A figure no one had considered. A figure who had been quietly observing the entire debacle, with a growing sense of a strange, unfamiliar resolve. Evelyn Reed was by nature and necessity an observer. She existed in the periphery, a ghost in a crisp white apron. Her movements were economical and quiet, a skill honed by years of navigating crowded restaurant floors and even more crowded city apartments. At 24, her life was a tightrope walk over a chasm of financial insecurity. Her mother's medical bills were a mountain she chipped away at with every meager paycheck, every hard-earned tip. Her own dreams of finishing her literature degree were a distant, hazy shoreline she wasn't sure she would ever reach. The Gilded Spoon was both her salvation and her purgatory. The pay was better than any other service job she'd ever had, but the pressure was immense. She was surrounded by a level of casual opulence that felt like a different universe. She served food that cost more than her weekly rent and poured wine for people who wore the price of her mother's last surgery on their wrists. Most of the time she was invisible, a functional part of the scenery, and she preferred it that way. Invisibility was safety. She had watched the scene with Sterling Thorne unfold from her post near the pastry kitchen. She saw the young couple's humiliation, the stark fear on Mr. Davenport's face, and the unprecedented unified defiance of the senior waiters. She knew their stories. She knew about Samuel's daughter, a bright girl who wanted to be a doctor. She knew Gregory was trying to save for a down payment on a small house with his wife. She knew Thomas treated the wine cellar like a sacred library. Their refusal wasn't cowardice, it was self-preservation. Evelyn felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Fear was a constant companion in her life. Fear of the next bill, fear of a phone call from the hospital, fear that one misstep at this high-stakes job could send her entire fragile world tumbling down. Serving a man like Sterling Thorne was a risk of catastrophic proportions. A single complaint, however baseless, could get her fired. Mr. Davenport was not known for his loyalty to his junior staff. She looked over at Thorne. He was still staring out the window, a statue of contempt. The whole room held its breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. And in that moment, something shifted inside Evelyn. It wasn't bravery, not in the heroic sense. It was something more practical, more desperate. It was a calculation. She did the math in her head. Her mother needed a new medication, one the insurance company was refusing to cover. It cost $600 a month. Her paycheck after taxes and her own expenses would barely cover half of it. She needed a miracle tip. The kind of tip that only came from the tables no one else wanted. The high-risk, high-reward gambles. The patrons at the Gilded Spoon were wealthy, but they were often insulated from the realities of needing money, and their tips, while consistent, were rarely life-changing. But a man like Sterling Thorne, a man who would pour an $18,000 bottle of wine down the drain out of sheer pique. What would a man like that tip, if by some miracle the service was flawless? Or what if he didn't tip at all? What if he simply had her fired? The risk was immense, a sheer cliff face. But the chasm of debt behind her was just as terrifying. It was a choice between a potential spectacular fall and the certainty of being slowly consumed by the darkness she was already in. She thought of her mother's tired smile, the way she tried to hide the pain in her joints. She thought of the textbooks she'd sold last semester just to make rent. The knot of anxiety in her stomach was still there, but now it was joined by a hard, cold ball of resolve. It wasn't about pride. It was about survival. Taking a deep breath, she smoothed the front of her apron. Her hands were trembling slightly, so she clasped them behind her back. She stepped out from the relative obscurity of the service station and walked directly toward Mr. Davenport. Her approach was so quiet that he didn't notice her until she was standing right beside him. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and irritation. "What is it, Evelyn? I'm dealing with a crisis." "I'll take the table, sir," she said. Her voice was low but steady. It cut through the tense murmuring of the other waiters. Samuel and Gregory turned to stare at her, their faces a canvas of disbelief. Davenport blinked. "You, Evelyn, with all due respect, this is Sterling Thorne. This isn't a table for junior staff. He'll eat you alive." It wasn't meant to be cruel, merely a statement of fact. "The senior staff have all declined the table," she pointed out gently. "Someone has to serve him, or you risk insulting him further by leaving him sitting there." This was a sound point, and Davenport knew it. The only thing worse than bad service was no service at all. To a man like Thorne, it would be the ultimate insult. He looked from Evelyn's determined face to the imposing figure at table 7, and back again. He was trapped. A rookie waitress was a terrible option, but she was his only option. "Do you have any idea what you're getting into?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "One wrong move, Evelyn. One. You spill a drop of water, you bring the wrong fork, you speak out of turn, and you're gone. Not just from the table from this restaurant. Do you understand me?" "I understand, sir," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Fine," he hissed, throwing his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "Fine. It's your funeral." He turned and stalked away toward his office, wanting to be as far away as possible when the inevitable fireworks began. Samuel stepped forward, his weathered face etched with concern. "Evelyn, you don't have to do this. The man is poison." "I know," she said, offering him a small, weak smile. "But my mother's prescription is also poisonously expensive. I have to try." Gregory just shook his head, a look of pity in his eyes. "Just keep your head down. Don't make eye contact unless he speaks to you. Agree with everything. You're a ghost, remember. He can't yell at a ghost." Evelyn nodded, appreciating their concern, but their advice felt like instructions for handling a wild animal. She straightened her spine, picked up a silver water pitcher, making sure it contained no unsolicited citrus, and a pristine, folded napkin. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to retreat to the safety of invisibility. But her feet, propelled by that cold, hard ball of resolve, carried her forward. She walked across the plush carpet of the dining room, each step feeling both impossibly heavy and terrifyingly light. The ambient noise of the room seemed to fade away, replaced by the thumping of her own blood in her ears. She was aware of the eyes of every other patron and staff member on her. They were watching a lamb walk into a lion's den. As she approached table 7, she focused on the simple mechanics of her job. Breathe, walk, don't trip. When she finally reached the table, Sterling Thorne still hadn't moved. He was staring out the window, his profile as sharp and unforgiving as a shard of flint. She stood beside the table for a moment, silent, waiting to be acknowledged. When he gave no indication that he knew she was there, she took another quiet breath. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice clear and soft. "My name is Evelyn, and I'll be your server this evening. May I pour you some water?" For the first time, Sterling Thorne turned his head from the window. His pale blue eyes, colder than she could have possibly imagined, met hers. The full crushing weight of his presence fell upon her. It was not just arrogance. It was an abyss, a profound and desolate emptiness that seemed to suck all the warmth and light out of the air. He said nothing. He simply stared, his expression unreadable, and in that silent, terrifying moment, Evelyn Reed's ordeal truly began. The silence stretched thin and taut, like a wire drawn to its breaking point. Evelyn held her ground, the heavy silver pitcher in her hand, suddenly feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. She refused to break his gaze, not out of defiance, but because she sensed that looking away would be an admission of fear. And fear was a currency he trafficked in. She kept her own expression neutral, a calm mask she had perfected over years of practice, hiding the frantic pulse in her throat. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he gave a minuscule, almost imperceptible nod. It was the barest twitch of his chin, a concession so small it was almost an insult. Evelyn moved with deliberate, unhurried grace. She unfolded the napkin and laid it across his lap, her movements precise, careful not to let her fingers brush against him. Then she picked up the heavy crystal tumbler and poured the water. Her hand was steady. Not a single drop was spilled. She filled the glass exactly 3/4 full, just as the restaurant's exacting standards dictated, and placed the pitcher back on the service tray. The specials this evening are a pan-seared scallops with a saffron risotto and a prime rib of bison. She began reciting the memorized script. "I don't care about the specials." He cut in his voice, a low rasp. It wasn't loud, but it had the authority of a judge's gavel. "Bring me the menu." "Of course, sir," she replied, retrieving the leather-bound menu from the small stand beside the table and presenting it to him. He took it without a word and opened it. His eyes scanned the pages with a dismissive speed, as if the carefully curated list of culinary masterpieces was nothing more than a cheap diner placemat. Evelyn waited, standing a respectful distance away, her hands clasped behind her back. She could feel Mr. Davenport's eyes burning into her from his office doorway. She could feel the pitying stares of the other patrons. She was on a stage, under a harsh, unforgiving spotlight. "This menu is predictable," Thorne announced to the room at large. He snapped it shut. "I want an egg, poached." Evelyn blinked. "A poached egg, sir." "Is the concept of a poached egg a difficult one for the chef to grasp?" He asked, his tone laced with a fine, sharp contempt. "One egg. Poached. Soft, not runny. The white must be fully set, the yolk warm and liquid like a sunset. It must be served on a single piece of toasted brioche cut into a perfect 2-inch square. The brioche is to be toasted to a color I would describe as old gold. Not pale yellow, not brown. Old gold. And it is to be buttered with unsalted butter, melted and brushed on, not spread. Do you understand these instructions?" "Yes, sir." Evelyn said, mentally transcribing the ridiculously specific order. A soft poached egg on a 2-inch square of old gold toasted brioche with brushed unsalted butter. "Is there anything else?" "Yes," he said, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers. "The plate. It must be a simple white plate. No garnish, no parsley, no pepper, no artistic drizzle of oil. If I see so much as a speck of green on that plate, I will send it back. I want the egg to be the sole focus. It should be a study in simplicity, an ode to the unadorned. Now go. You have 15 minutes. Evelyn nodded. 15 minutes. Very good, sir. She turned and walked toward the kitchen, her composure a fragile shell around a swirling vortex of disbelief and anxiety. A single poached egg. It was the simplest and most complicated order she had ever taken. It was not a request for food, it was a test, a meticulously designed gauntlet of failure. She pushed through the swinging doors into the chaotic, controlled world of the kitchen. The head chef, a fiery Frenchman named Antoine, looked up from the pass. "What does the tyrant want?" Antoine grumbled. Evelyn relayed the order, every single ludicrous detail. The other kitchen staff stopped what they were doing to listen their expressions, a mixture of amusement and horror. Antoine stared at her, then let out a string of furious French expletives. An ode to the unadorned egg. He wants poetry on a plate. This is a kitchen, not the Louvre, old gold. What is this color, old gold? Does he think I have a painter's palette back here? I know it's ridiculous, Evelyn said, keeping her voice calm. But he was very specific. He's timing me. 15 minutes. Antoine threw his hands up, but then he looked at Evelyn. He saw the genuine plea in her eyes, the sheer, unadulterated stress. He had seen the other waiters refuse the table. He knew what she was up against. A flicker of sympathy, or perhaps professional pride, crossed his face. "Fine," he snapped. "Fine. Get out of my kitchen. I will make this unadorned ode. But if he sends it back, I am coming out there myself." Evelyn retreated, her heart pounding. She spent the next 10 minutes hovering near the service station, refilling water glasses at other tables, trying to look busy, but her entire being was focused on that one order. She glanced at the clock. 12 minutes had passed. Then a small bell dinged at the kitchen pass. Antoine placed a single white plate under the heat lamp. On it sat a perfect glistening poached egg on a small square of toast. The toast was a flawless burnished gold. Evelyn rushed over. "Tell him it took 14 minutes, because perfection cannot be rushed," Antoine said, with a grim smile. Evelyn picked up the plate. It was almost comical in its simplicity. A single egg on a piece of toast on a vast expanse of white porcelain. She carried it out to the dining room as if it were the crown jewels. She placed the plate before Sterling Thorne. He looked down at it, his eyes narrowed in critical assessment. He picked up his fork and gently nudged the egg. It wobbled firm but delicate. He then used the side of his fork to slice into it. The white parted cleanly, and a perfect liquid gold yolk spilled out onto the toast. A sunset. Evelyn held her breath. Thorne took a small bite. He chewed slowly, his expression giving nothing away. He swallowed. He took another bite. He finished the entire piece of toast and egg in 4 deliberate, silent bites. Then he pushed the plate away and dabbed his lips with the linen napkin. He looked up at Evelyn. "The toast," he said, his voice flat. It was acceptable. A wave of relief so profound it almost made her dizzy washed over Evelyn. Acceptable. From Sterling Thorne, that was the highest praise imaginable. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say. "May I get you anything else? Perhaps some coffee or dessert?" "No," he said, his gaze drifting back to the window. "Just the bill." This was another test. A man orders a single $10 egg in a restaurant like this and then asks for the bill. He was playing a game. But Evelyn didn't flinch. "Right away, sir." She retrieved the bill enclosed in its leather folio and placed it discreetly on the table. He didn't even glance at it. He reached into his jacket, produced a wallet made of dark, supple leather, and extracted a single bill. Without looking at it, he tucked it into the folio and slid it toward her. "This should cover the damages," he said cryptically. He then stood up, his movements fluid and precise, buttoned his jacket, and without another word or a backward glance, strode out of the restaurant. The heavy doors swung shut behind him, and the spell was broken. The dining room collectively exhaled. The buzz of conversation slowly returned, now laced with excited whispers about what had just transpired. Mr. Davenport rushed out from his office, his face a mess of confusion. "He's gone. What happened? Did he complain?" "No, sir," Evelyn said, her voice still trembling slightly. "He ate, and then he left." Her hand shook as she reached for the leather folio. It felt strangely heavy. Davenport, Samuel, and Gregory all watched, their curiosity piqued. What does a man who orders an impossible egg leave as a tip? A single dollar, a condescending note. Evelyn opened the folio. Inside was not a 1 or a 10 or even a 20. It was a crisp $100 bill, a respectable, if not overly generous tip for a simple order. But underneath the bill was something else. It was a business card, plain white with his name, Sterling Thorne, embossed in black. and on the back, written in a sharp, angular hand, were a few words. "The park. Tomorrow. 3 p.m. Don't be late." Evelyn stared at the card. It wasn't a tip. It was a summons. The gauntlet wasn't over. It had just entered a new, far more terrifying phase. What on earth could a man like Sterling Thorne possibly want with a waitress in the park? The relief she had felt only moments before evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The abyss she had seen in his eyes was beckoning her closer. The next day dawned grey and overcast the sky, a muted reflection of Evelyn's own apprehension. The $100 bill was tucked safely in her wallet, a tangible yet unsettling reward. It wasn't enough to solve her problems, but it was a start. The business card, however, sat on her small kitchen table like a ticking bomb. "The park. Tomorrow. 3 p.m. Don't be late." What could it mean? A job offer, an interrogation, a final public humiliation. Her mind raced through a dozen scenarios, each more unlikely and frightening than the last. She told herself she didn't have to go. She had done her job, survived the encounter, and earned a tip. She owed him nothing more, but curiosity mingled with a strange, inexplicable sense of obligation gnawed at her. She had seen something in his eyes beyond mere arrogance, a deep, chilling emptiness. She had passed his ridiculous test, and now it seemed there was a second, far more personal one. At 2:45 p.m., she found herself walking along the winding paths of Central Park, the crisp autumn air, doing little to calm her nerves. She wore a simple dark coat over her plainest clothes, wanting to remain as anonymous as possible. She spotted him easily. He was sitting on a solitary bench, overlooking the pond, the same one where children sailed miniature boats in the summer. He was dressed not in a severe suit, but in a simple cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He looked smaller without the armor of his wealth, less of a titan and more of a man. He was tossing small pieces of a bread roll into the water, watching the ducks squabble over the crumbs with a detached, melancholy air. Evelyn approached the bench slowly, her boots crunching on the fallen leaves. He didn't look up until she stood a few feet away. "You came," he said. It wasn't a question. "You were very specific," she replied, her voice cautious. He gestured to the empty space beside him on the bench. "Sit." She sat perching on the edge of the cold green wood, keeping a careful distance between them. For a long time they said nothing. The only sounds were the distant city traffic, the quacking of the ducks, and the rustle of the wind in the bare trees. The silence was different from the one in the restaurant. It wasn't tense or hostile. It was heavy with unspoken thoughts. "Why the egg?" Evelyn asked, finally, unable to bear the quiet any longer. He tossed another piece of bread into the water. "It was my wife's favorite," he said, his voice quiet and rough, as if the words were being dredged up from a great depth. "Penelope. She wasn't a fan of elaborate food. She said the simplest things were the hardest to get right. A perfectly poached egg. A perfect cup of coffee. A perfect moment of quiet." He turned to look at Evelyn, and for the first time the coldness in his eyes was gone. In its place was a vast, desolate landscape of grief. The abyss she had sensed was the chasm left by loss. She could make a perfect poached egg every single time. He continued, a faint ghost of a smile touching his lips. She'd call it her little sun on a cloud. We used to have them for breakfast on Sunday mornings, right here on this bench sometimes. We'd get coffee from that little cart over there, and she'd bring eggs from home, wrapped in a napkin to keep them warm. Suddenly, his behavior in the restaurant clicked into place. The impossible standards, the obsession with detail, the ode to the unadorned. It wasn't a test of her competence. It was a ritual, a desperate, angry attempt to recreate a memory that was slipping through his fingers like sand. He wasn't testing the chef, he was testing the universe, raging against it for failing to replicate the simple perfection he had lost. She passed away 5 years ago, he said, his gaze returning to the water. Cancer. It was fast. One day she was laughing about the way I buttered toast all wrong the next. She was gone. The Gilded Spoon was the last restaurant we ever went to together. For our anniversary. She hated it. She said the chandeliers were pretentious and the waiters hovered like vultures. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. He wasn't a monster. He was a man drowning in grief, and his arrogance was the furious, thrashing attempt to keep his head above water. He went to the one place that held the last echo of her, and in his pain he tried to punish it for still existing when she didn't. Every year on the anniversary of that dinner, I go back, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I go back and I don't know what I'm doing. I push people. I make them hate me. I think I want someone to see how ugly it all is, how ugly the world feels without her in it. I want them to feel a fraction of the frustration, the rage that I feel every single day. He let out a short, bitter laugh. It's pathetic, isn't it? A billionaire playing cruel games with waiters because he misses his wife. Evelyn didn't know what to say. The usual platitudes, "I'm so sorry for your loss," felt hollow and inadequate in the face of such raw, monumental pain. So she said nothing of the sort. Instead, she thought of her own life, the quiet desperation, the constant fear. Her pain was different, a slow, grinding worry rather than a sharp, gaping wound. But it was pain nonetheless. "My mother is sick," she said softly. He looked at her, surprised by her candor. "She has a degenerative joint disease. Some days she can't get out of bed. She used to love to garden. She had these incredible rose bushes. Now she just sits by the window and looks at the empty pots on the fire escape." She paused, looking at her own hands, clasped in her lap. "Sometimes the sheer unfairness of it makes me angry. So angry I want to scream at someone. Anyone. A stranger on the subway, the person in front of me at the grocery store. I don't. But I understand the impulse. I understand wanting to make the world feel as broken as you do." A profound stillness settled between them. He wasn't Sterling Thorne, the billionaire tyrant, and she wasn't Evelyn Reed, the timid waitress. They were just two people sitting on a park bench on a grey afternoon, sharing a moment of unguarded human truth. He hadn't summoned her here to intimidate her or offer her a job. He had summoned her because, in a room full of people who saw a monster, she had been the only one who hadn't flinched. She hadn't cowered or placated him. She had simply done her job with a quiet dignity that had, in its own way, refused to participate in his drama. She had met his rage not with fear, but with a calm competence that had somehow pierced through his armor. "Why did you take my table?" he asked, his voice genuinely curious now. Everyone else refused. They were afraid of me. "I was afraid of you too," Evelyn admitted honestly. "But I was more afraid of not being able to pay for my mother's medicine. It was a calculated risk." He nodded slowly, a flicker of respect in his eyes. He appreciated the cold logic of it. "A calculated risk," he repeated, as if tasting the words. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out not a wallet, but a small, worn photograph in a silver frame. He held it out to her. It was a picture of a woman with a vibrant, infectious smile and kind eyes. Her hair was caught in the wind, and she was laughing, looking at someone just out of frame, presumably the man holding the camera. Penelope. She looked full of life, the kind of person who could find joy in a simple poached egg. You were the first person who didn't look at me with either fear or greed." Sterling said, his voice cracking slightly as he looked at the photograph. "You just looked at me, and you brought me the egg. And for a second, for just 1 second, it felt a little less empty." The wind picked up, sending a cascade of yellow and red leaves skittering across the path. The unraveling was complete. The monster had been stripped away, revealing the grieving man beneath. And Evelyn, who had walked into the park fearing for her job, now found herself feeling an emotion she never would have expected, a deep, profound, and heartbreaking empathy. The silver-framed photograph of Penelope lay between them on the bench, a small sacred object in the muted afternoon light. Evelyn looked from the laughing woman in the picture to the broken man beside her. The chasm of wealth and status that had separated them in the restaurant had vanished, replaced by the common, uneven ground of human suffering. "She looks like she was a wonderful person," Evelyn said, her voice soft. "She was everything," Sterling replied, his gaze fixed on the photo. "She was the one who kept me grounded. I've always been driven ambitious. I see the world in terms of assets and liabilities, wins and losses. She saw it in terms of people of moments. She would have liked you. She would have admired your courage." "It wasn't courage," Evelyn insisted quietly. "It was desperation. The two are often indistinguishable," he countered, finally looking up from the photograph and meeting her eyes. "Desperation is what drives a man to build an empire from nothing. It's also what drives a young woman to face down a man everyone else is terrified of, all for the sake of her mother. The motive is pure." He seemed to be seeing her for the first time, not as a functionary or a component in his bizarre annual ritual, but as a person with her own story, her own quiet battles. The dynamic had shifted completely. He had summoned her here presumably to continue his game, but her unexpected response, her quiet sharing of her own struggles, had disarmed him entirely. "The medicine for your mother," he said, changing the subject abruptly. "The one you can't afford? What is it?" Evelyn was taken aback. It's a specialty biologic. It's new and the insurance company is fighting us on it." "Write it down," he commanded, though the harsh edge was gone from his voice. It was now the tone of a man used to solving problems. He pulled a slim, elegant pen and a small, leather-bound notebook from his pocket. Evelyn hesitated. "Mr. Thorne, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," he interrupted gently. "I'm offering. I spend more on a single board meeting lunch than this medicine probably costs for a year. I own 3 pharmaceutical distribution companies. Consider it a consultation fee. You provided me with a service last night that was worth far more than the $100 I left you." He pushed the notebook and pen toward her. Seeing the determined, almost pleading look in his eyes, Evelyn slowly took them. With a slightly trembling hand, she wrote down the name of the medication and her mother's doctor. It felt surreal, like a scene from a dream. He took the notebook back and tore out the page, folding it carefully and placing it in his breast pocket. "My personal assistant, a formidable woman named Genevieve, will handle it. You should hear from your pharmacy by the end of the day. The prescription will be covered for as long as your mother needs it." Tears pricked at the corners of Evelyn's eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. She hadn't cried when the bills piled up or when she was working a double shift on her feet for 16 hours. She wouldn't cry now, but the relief was so sudden, so overwhelming, it was a physical force. It felt like a great, heavy weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying had just been lifted from her shoulders. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Thank you isn't a big enough word." "Don't thank me," he said, his voice low. You did something for me last night. You sat through my ridiculous, cruel performance. You didn't run. You didn't cry. You just did your job. You brought me a perfect poached egg. You gave me 1 minute of peace in 5 years of noise. I am merely settling a debt." They sat in silence again, but it was a comfortable, companionable silence now. He told her more about Penelope, how they had met in college when he was a scholarship student with one shabby suit to his name, how she had believed in him when no one else did, how her laugh could fill a room. He spoke of his grief, not as a dramatic tragedy, but as a constant dull ache, a phantom limb that still throbbed with pain years later. Evelyn, in turn, found herself speaking about her mother, not just her illness, but the woman she was before it, a vibrant, funny woman who taught her to love books and to see the beauty in small things. She spoke of her deferred dreams of finishing her degree, of one day being able to write her own stories instead of just reading them. It was a strange and unexpected confessional. 2 lives so impossibly different had intersected over an act of manufactured cruelty and found a moment of genuine connection. He wasn't looking for pity or absolution. He was simply lonely, trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, and Evelyn, who had felt so alone in her struggles, found a strange comfort in being truly seen by the most unlikely person imaginable. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the park, Sterling finally stood up. "I have kept you long enough," he said. He seemed different. The crushing weight on his shoulders seemed to have lightened, if only slightly. The emptiness in his eyes had been filled for a moment with something akin to warmth. "Will you be all right?" Evelyn asked the question, surprising her with its sincerity. He looked down at the photograph of his wife, which he still held in his hand. "No," he said with a sad, honest smile. "But I think for the first time in a long time, I might be. Eventually." He reached into his pocket again, and Evelyn's heart sank, thinking he was going to offer her more money, which would have somehow cheapened the moment. But instead, he pulled out the business card she had given back to him with the notebook. "If you should ever decide you wish to finish that literature degree," he said, his tone formal but kind, "my foundation has a number of educational grants. Genevieve's number is on the back. She would be delighted to hear from you." He didn't wait for a reply. He simply gave her a small, respectful nod, turned and walked away, his solitary figure receding down the path until he was swallowed by the encroaching twilight. Evelyn remained on the bench, the business card clutched in her hand. It was more than a phone number. It was a key to a future she had thought was lost to her forever. The unexpected connection she had forged had done more than just pay for her mother's medicine. It had given her back a piece of herself. The meeting that had begun with dread had ended with a breathtaking, unbelievable glimmer of hope. True to Sterling Thorne's word, a call came that very evening. It wasn't the pharmacy, but a calm, efficient woman who introduced herself as Genevieve, Mr. Thorne's executive assistant. She informed Evelyn that a private grant from the Thorne Foundation had been established in her mother's name to cover all of her medical expenses indefinitely. Furthermore, a second grant, a full academic scholarship, was being processed for Evelyn Reed to complete her Bachelor of Arts in English Literature at Columbia University, should she choose to accept it. Evelyn sat on her worn sofa, the phone pressed to her ear, in a state of stunned silence. When the call ended, she walked to the window of her tiny apartment and looked out at the sprawling, indifferent city. For the first time, it didn't feel like a place that was trying to crush her. It felt like a place full of impossible, breathtaking possibilities, The single act of taking a table, of facing down her fear for the most practical of reasons, had set in motion a chain of events that had irrevocably altered the course of her life. The changes were not just her own. The story of what had happened, the impossible egg, the mysterious meeting in the park, the sudden generosity rippled through the staff of the Gilded Spoon like a shockwave. It became the restaurant's own private legend. The following week, Sterling Thorne returned to the restaurant. There was a moment of collective panic when he walked through the door, but this time he was different. He waited patiently to be seated. He didn't demand table 7. He spoke to Mr. Davenport politely, and when he was seated, he specifically asked, "Is Evelyn working this evening? I should like for her to be my server, if she is available." Evelyn, who had come in to work her final 2 weeks before, handing in her notice to prepare for the spring semester, took his table. The atmosphere was entirely changed. There were no tests, no cruel games. He ordered the bison steak medium rare and a glass of Cabernet that Thomas the sommelier recommended with a newfound confidence. He ate his meal quietly, asking Evelyn about the books she was planning to read for her courses. He spoke to her not as a servant, but as an equal, a friend. When he left, he tipped 200%. His transformation had a profound effect on the staff. Seeing the supposed monster transformed into a quiet, grieving man who was capable of immense kindness changed their perspective. The fear he had once inspired was replaced by a kind of respectful sympathy. Samuel and Gregory no longer saw him as a tyrant, but as a man carrying a heavy burden. Their own service toward him on his subsequent visits became infused with a quiet empathy. The entire culture of the restaurant floor seemed to shift, becoming a little softer, a little more human. Mr. Davenport, having witnessed the whole affair, even started treating his junior staff with a newfound degree of respect, realizing that courage and competence could be found where he least expected it. Evelyn finished her 2 weeks at the Gilded Spoon, her apron hung up for the last time. Her colleagues threw her a small, heartfelt farewell party, pooling their tips to buy her a beautiful set of leather-bound classic novels. Samuel gave her a hug, whispering, "You showed us all something, kid. Don't you ever forget that." Months later, Evelyn was sitting in a sun-drenched library at Columbia, a stack of books beside her, completely immersed in a lecture on postmodern poetry. Her life was unrecognizable. The constant grinding worry about money was gone, replaced by the joyful challenge of academia. Her mother, free from the pain that had crippled her for so long, had started a small container garden on her balcony, her beloved roses finally blooming again. One afternoon, a package arrived for Evelyn at her new student apartment. It was a small, heavy box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a single, exquisitely crafted Fabergé-style egg made of porcelain and gold. It was simple, unadorned, and beautiful. There was a small plain card with it. It read, "For the woman who understands the importance of a simple egg. Thank you, St." Evelyn placed the egg on her desk, where it caught the light and seemed to glow from within. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest risks lead to the most profound rewards. A reminder that behind the scariest facades can lie the deepest pain, and a reminder that a single act of kindness, of empathy, even one born of desperation, can have a ripple effect, changing not just one life, but many in the most beautiful and unexpected ways. The story of Evelyn Reed and Sterling Thorne is a powerful testament to the idea that we never truly know the battles other people are fighting. It's a reminder that behind a mask of arrogance can be a heart shattered by grief, and that beneath a quiet exterior can lie a reservoir of incredible strength. Evelyn's choice wasn't about heroics. It was a desperate gamble that paid off in ways she could never have imagined. It changed her life, but it also started a healing process for a man lost in his own darkness. Her story proves that empathy is not weakness, but the most powerful tool we have for connection. It's the simple, profound act of seeing the human being behind the behavior. If this story moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories that explore the incredible depths of the human heart. Thank you for listening.